Growing up as the youngest of 3 siblings, I'd always been the family afterthought. While my brother Marcus excelled at everything, star quarterback, valedictorian, full scholarship to Harvard Business School, I quietly pursued art and hospitality management at a state school. The family narrative was clear. Marcus was destined for greatness and I was destined to struggle. "She's got no business sense," Dad would tell his golf buddies whenever my career came up. Wasting time on hotel management when she could have followed Marcus into finance. Mom would nod sympathetically as if my career choice was a personal disappointment she'd learned to accept with grace. The family dynamic crystallized perfectly at every gathering. Marcus would hold court at the center of attention, regaling everyone with stories of his latest business conquest, while I sat quietly in the corner, occasionally asked to help serve drinks or clear plates. It was an arrangement everyone seemed comfortable with. Everyone except me, though I never voiced my objection. 3 years ago, when Marcus announced his engagement to Victoria, a pharmaceutical heiress from Connecticut, the family celebration lasted for weeks. The engagement party was held at the country club, with 200 guests toasting their perfect match. I was invited, naturally, but seated at a table with distant cousins and family friends who barely knew my name. "Isn't it wonderful how successful Marcus has become?" Aunt Helen had gushed that night. And poor little Emma, still figuring things out. The condescending pat on my shoulder that followed became a family trademark gesture, one I'd grown accustomed to receiving. The wedding planning consumed our family for 18 months. Victoria wanted everything perfect for their power couple celebration, as she called it. The venue selection alone took 6 months, with the family touring luxury hotels across the East Coast, searching for a location worthy of Marcus's success story. When they finally settled on the Grand Metropolitan, a flagship luxury hotel in downtown Boston, the family was ecstatic. "Only the best for Marcus and Victoria," Mom declared. "This is where important people get married." The irony wasn't lost on me, but I kept my thoughts to myself as always. The wedding weekend arrived with all the pomp the family had anticipated. Marcus's groomsmen were a collection of investment bankers, consultants, and entrepreneurs, each more accomplished than the last. Victoria's side included pharmaceutical executives, old money socialites, and political connections. Together, they represented the kind of network Marcus had always wanted to join. I arrived at the Grand Metropolitan on Friday evening for the rehearsal dinner, wearing a simple navy dress I'd chosen specifically to avoid drawing attention. The hotel's opulent lobby buzzed with wedding guests, all designer clothes and confident laughter. I checked in quietly at the reception desk, using the room reservation Marcus had made for family members. "Emma Williams?" the desk clerk asked, consulting her computer. "Oh yes, we have you in the premium suite on the 28th floor." She handed me a key card with an odd smile. "Please let us know if there's anything at all we can do to make your stay more comfortable." The rehearsal dinner took place in the hotel's private dining room, an elegant space with crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. Marcus and Victoria held court at the head table, surrounded by their wedding party and immediate family. I was seated at a side table with elderly relatives and family friends who spent most of the evening discussing their various ailments. "Emma's still in the hospitality business," Mom explained to the table when someone asked about my career. "She manages some little boutique hotels." The dismissive tone was subtle but unmistakable. Several people nodded politely before changing the subject back to Marcus's recent promotion to senior vice president. The wedding ceremony itself was flawless. Victoria looked stunning in her custom Varawang gown, and Marcus beamed with the confidence of a man whose life was unfolding exactly as planned. I sat in the 4th row with family friends, watching my brother marry into the kind of success our parents had always dreamed of for him. After the ceremony, guests moved to the hotel's grand ballroom for the reception. The space was transformed into something from a fairy tale, with thousands of white orchids, crystal centerpieces, and ambient lighting that made everyone look like they belonged in a magazine spread. The guest list read like a who's who of Boston's business elite, with pharmaceutical executives, investment bankers, and political figures mingling over champagne and caviar. I found my assigned seat at table 12, near the back of the room. My table mates included a few of Marcus's high school teachers, some distant relatives I barely knew, and Victoria's elderly great-aunt who spent most conversations complaining about the volume of the music. It was clearly the table for guests who needed to be invited but didn't warrant premium placement. As dinner was served, I watched Marcus and Victoria making their rounds to each table, graciously thanking guests for attending. When they reached our table, Marcus gave me a quick hug and Victoria offered a polite smile, but they didn't linger. There were more important people to greet, more significant relationships to maintain. That's when Marcus's college friends at the neighboring table began their commentary. "Look at her sitting alone over there," whispered James, Marcus's former roommate who now worked at Goldman Sachs. His voice carried just enough to be audible at my table. "Definitely a budget table guest." "Who is she?" asked another groomsman, squinting in my direction. Marcus glanced over casually and shrugged. "Family obligation invite. My sister Emma. She's nice enough but not really our crowd, if you know what I mean." The group nodded knowingly. In their world, family obligation invites were an unfortunate necessity. People who had to be included for appearance's sake but didn't really belong among the successful, accomplished guests who mattered. "What does she do?" James pressed. "Some kind of hotel management thing," Marcus replied with the same dismissive tone Mom had used the night before. "Nothing significant. He's always been more of the artistic type, you know? Not particularly business-minded." I felt heat rise to my cheeks but forced myself to maintain composure. This was Marcus's night and I had no intention of causing a scene. Instead, I smiled politely and focused on my dinner, pretending not to hear the conversation that had moved on to Marcus's latest business conquests. The wedding reception continued around me like a perfectly choreographed performance. Marcus and Victoria's first dance was elegant and practiced, clearly the result of months of professional lessons. The speeches were polished and heartfelt, painting a picture of a couple destined for greatness together. Everything was exactly as the family had envisioned, a celebration worthy of Marcus's success story. As the evening progressed, I found myself feeling increasingly invisible. Conversations swirled around me about business deals, investment strategies, and political connections. When people asked what I did for work, their interest visibly waned when I mentioned hospitality management. Several times I caught Marcus's friends glancing in my direction and whispering, clearly speculating about how I'd ended up at such an elegant celebration. During the cake cutting, I stepped outside onto the hotel's terrace for some fresh air. The view of Boston Harbor was breathtaking, with city lights reflecting off the water like scattered diamonds. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine what it would feel like to truly belong at an event like this. To be seen as successful and accomplished rather than tolerated as a family obligation. "Excuse me, are you Emma Williams?" I turned to find a well-dressed man in his 50s approaching. His name tag identified him as Robert Chin, hotel director. "Yes, that's me," I replied, wondering if there was some issue with my room or the evening's arrangements. "Ms. Williams, I've been looking for you all evening. I wanted to personally ensure everything is perfect for tonight's celebration. Is there anything at all we can do to enhance your experience?" His level of attention seemed excessive for a regular guest, but I appreciated the professional courtesy. "Everything has been wonderful, thank you. The wedding is beautiful." "I'm delighted to hear that. If you don't mind me asking, how do you know the bride and groom?" "Marcus is my brother," I explained. Mr. Chen's expression shifted to something I couldn't quite read. "Your brother?" "Of course. Well, please don't hesitate to contact me personally if you need anything at all. Anything whatsoever." He handed me his business card with a slight bow before disappearing back into the reception. The interaction felt oddly formal, but I attributed it to the hotel's commitment to exceptional service for such a high-profile event. When I returned to the ballroom, the dancing was in full swing. Marcus and Victoria moved effortlessly through a crowd of accomplished friends and family members, each conversation another opportunity to network and build their already impressive social capital. I watched from my table as they were introduced to pharmaceutical executives, investment fund managers, and political figures who could open doors to even greater success. "She really doesn't fit in here, does she?" I heard one of Victoria's sorority sisters comment to another. They were standing near the bar, close enough to my table that their voices carried clearly. "Who?" her friend asked. "The sister. I think she seems nice enough but definitely not their usual crowd. Marcus mentioned she works in hospitality or something. Probably doesn't make much money. Well, at least she's trying to dress appropriately. That navy dress is actually quite lovely, even if it's clearly not designer. I felt my face burn with embarrassment, but I kept my expression neutral. This was exactly the kind of situation I'd spent my entire life navigating, being discussed as if I weren't present, being evaluated and found wanting by people who saw me as fundamentally different from themselves. The conversation continued as the evening wore on. Marcus's business school friends dominated the area around the head table, sharing stories of recent successes and future plans. Victoria's pharmaceutical connections clustered near the bar, discussing industry trends and regulatory changes. Everyone seemed to belong to some exclusive club that required credentials I simply didn't possess. Around 11 o'clock, as the reception began winding down, I decided to head back to my room. The evening had been beautiful and Marcus looked genuinely happy, but I felt increasingly out of place among his successful friends and Victoria's accomplished family members. I said my goodbyes to the relatives at my table and made my way toward the elevator. Emma. I turned to see Marcus approaching, slightly flushed from champagne and dancing. Thanks for coming, he said, pulling me into a quick hug. I know this probably isn't your usual scene, but it means a lot that you were here. It was beautiful, Marcus. Really. Victoria looks stunning and you both seem so happy. We are. And who knows? Maybe some of this success will rub off on you eventually. He grinned, clearly intending the comment as brotherly teasing, but it stung more than he realized. Maybe, I replied with a smile. Congratulations again. As I waited for the elevator, I could hear the reception continuing behind me. Laughter, music, and the sound of people who belonged together celebrating a future full of promise and possibility. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped inside with relief, grateful for a moment of solitude. The elevator stopped on the 15th floor and Robert Chin, the hotel director, stepped on. He looked surprised to see me. Ms. Williams. Leaving the celebration early? Just heading to my room. It's been a long day. Of course. I hope everything exceeded your expectations this evening. Absolutely. The staff has been exceptional and the venue is gorgeous. Mr. Chin smiled, but there was something in his expression I couldn't interpret. We're honored to host such an important celebration for your family. The elevator reached the 28th floor and I stepped out into the hallway. As the doors closed behind me, I heard Mr. Chin speaking quietly into his phone. She's heading to her room now. Yes, I'll make sure everything is ready for tomorrow morning. I thought it was an odd conversation for nearly midnight, but luxury hotels operated on different schedules than the rest of the world. Probably just making arrangements for tomorrow's checkout process or some other logistical detail. My suite was more luxurious than I'd expected. A spacious living area with harbor views, a marble bathroom, and amenities that probably cost more per night than most people's monthly rent. I settled onto the sofa with a cup of tea from the room's service bar, reflecting on the evening's events. The truth was, I'd grown accustomed to being the family's afterthought. Marcus's success was real and impressive, and he deserved recognition for his achievements. If that meant I played a supporting role in family narratives, so be it. I had my own life, my own quiet satisfactions, even if they didn't translate into the kind of social capital that impressed wedding guests. The next morning I packed my belongings and prepared for checkout. The wedding had been beautiful, Marcus and Victoria were clearly well matched, and despite some uncomfortable moments, the evening had gone smoothly. I was looking forward to returning to my own routine, my own world where I didn't feel perpetually out of place. As I wheeled my suitcase toward the elevator, my phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. Thanks again for last night. You were a good sport about everything. Love you, sis. I was typing a response when the elevator doors opened to reveal Robert Chin once again. Ms. Williams, perfect timing. Would you mind joining me in my office for just a moment? There's something I need to discuss with you before you leave. His tone was professional but urgent, and I wondered if there was some issue with the bill or the room arrangements. I followed him through a series of corridors to an executive office suite I hadn't known existed. Please have a seat, he said, gesturing to a leather chair across from his desk. I wanted to personally thank you for choosing the Grand Metropolitan for your brother's wedding celebration. It was Marcus and Victoria's choice, but thank you. Everything was perfect. Mr. Chin opened a folder on his desk and consulted several documents. Ms. Williams, I have to ask, did you enjoy staying at our property? Very much. The service has been exceptional and the facilities are beautiful. I'm delighted to hear that. We take pride in exceeding expectations for all our guests. He paused, studying my face. Especially our ownership. The word hung in the air between us like a question I didn't understand. I'm sorry. Ms. Williams, surely you know that we've been expecting you? The entire staff has been briefed about your visit. We wanted to ensure everything was absolutely perfect for the weekend. I stared at him, completely confused. I think there might be some mistake. I'm just here for my brother's wedding. I don't understand what you mean about ownership. Mr. Chen's expression shifted to something approaching concern. Ms. Williams, you do realize that you own this hotel? Along with the other 47 properties in the Metropolitan Luxury Group. The words didn't make sense. I felt like I was listening to a conversation in a foreign language that I almost understood but not quite. I think you have me confused with someone else, I said slowly. I work in hospitality management, but I certainly don't own any hotels. Mr. Chen opened another folder and withdrew a series of legal documents. According to our records, Emma Catherine Williams became the sole owner of Metropolitan Luxury Group 18 months ago, following the terms of your grandmother's trust fund. The transition was handled through Pemberton Walsh and Associates in New York. My grandmother's trust fund. The phrase hit me like cold water. I remembered the meeting with the lawyers after Grandma Rose's funeral. She'd been the family's success story. A woman who'd started with nothing and built a small boarding house into something larger. The family always spoke about her modest investments and small property holdings, but nobody discussed specifics. The lawyers had explained something about assets being held in trust until I turned 28, but the language was so dense and legal that I barely understood what they were telling me. They'd mentioned hotel properties and investment portfolios, but I'd assumed they meant small, local establishments. Maybe a few bed and breakfasts or budget motels. 18 months ago was my 28th birthday, I said quietly. Exactly. Your grandmother's instructions were very specific. All Metropolitan Luxury Group properties were to be transferred to your control when you reached that age, with the provision that the transition be handled discreetly through our management company. Mr. Chen spread several documents across his desk. Property deeds, financial statements, and corporate filings that painted a picture I'd never imagined. The Grand Metropolitan wasn't just one hotel. It was the flagship property of a luxury chain spanning major cities across the country. Boston, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Miami. Each property worth tens of millions of dollars. The total portfolio value is approximately $1.2 billion, Mr. Chen continued matter-of-factly. Your grandmother was quite the businesswoman, Ms. Williams. She started with that boarding house in Salem and spent 6 decades building one of the most successful hospitality empires on the East Coast. I stared at the documents, trying to process information that seemed to belong to someone else's life. But the family always said she had modest investments. A few small properties. Your grandmother was extremely private about her business affairs. Even our board of directors didn't know the identity of the ultimate owner until the trust documents were executed 18 months ago. We've been operating under management company oversight, waiting for you to take active control. The room seemed to spin slightly. For 18 months, while my family had been treating me like a charity case who couldn't afford to keep up with Marcus's success, I'd been unknowingly one of the wealthiest people in Massachusetts. Ms. Williams, are you all right? Can I get you some water? I nodded, still staring at the financial statements. Annual revenues in the hundreds of millions. Properties in prime locations that I'd walked past countless times without knowing I owned them. A hospitality empire that my grandmother had built quietly and left entirely to me. Why didn't anyone tell me? Finally asked. Your grandmother's instructions were very specific about discretion. She wanted you to have time to establish yourself professionally before taking on this responsibility. The management company has been overseeing operations with the understanding that you would assume control when you felt ready. And last night, the wedding reception. Mr. Chen smiled slightly. We wanted to ensure everything was perfect for your family's celebration. When we saw the booking for Marcus Williams and realized the connection, the entire staff was briefed about providing exceptional service. We had no idea you didn't know about the ownership structure. I thought about the odd looks, the overly attentive service, the special treatment that had seemed excessive for a regular guest. The staff hadn't been providing exceptional customer service. They'd been taking care of their owner. Ms. Williams, what would you like us to do? The board of directors has been eager to meet with you for months. We have quarterly reports, expansion proposals, and several acquisition opportunities that require ownership approval. My phone buzzed with another text from Marcus. Hope you got home safely. Sorry if some of the guys were a little pretentious last night. You know how investment banker types can be. Investment banker types. I almost laughed at the irony. Mr. Chin, I need some time to process all of this. Can we schedule a meeting for next week? I'd like to review everything properly. Of course. Should I arrange for our legal team to brief you on the corporate structure? And perhaps our financial advisors can walk you through the portfolio performance. That would be helpful. I gathered the documents he'd given me, my hands still slightly trembling. One more thing. Last night my brother and his friends, they didn't know about any of this. No, ma'am. Your grandmother's discretion instructions were very clear. Only essential management personnel were informed of the ownership structure. I stood to leave, my mind racing with implications I was only beginning to understand. At the door I turned back to Mr. Chen. The wedding bill. For last night's reception. Already taken care of, Ms. Williams. Complimentary, naturally. We were honored to host your family's celebration. The elevator ride to the lobby felt surreal. I was the same person who had arrived 2 days ago, but everything had changed. As I walked through the opulent lobby toward the exit, I saw it with completely different eyes. This wasn't just a luxury hotel where my brother had gotten married. This was my luxury hotel. One of 48 properties that I apparently owned. My phone rang as I reached the street. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. Hey, just wanted to make sure you got out okay. Victoria and I are about to head to the airport for our honeymoon. Everything's fine, Marcus. Have a wonderful trip. Thanks. And hey, sorry again if last night felt a little overwhelming. Victoria's crowd can be pretty intense and my business school friends aren't always the most inclusive. You handled it well. It was fine. Really. Good. When we get back from Tuscany, maybe we can grab dinner. I'd love to hear more about what you're working on these days. Your hotel management thing. My hotel management thing. I looked back at the Grand Metropolitan, its elegant facade gleaming in the morning sunlight. I'd like that, I said. I have quite a bit to tell you about my work. After hanging up, I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, watching hotel guests come and go through the revolving doors. Business executives, tourists, families, all of them passing through a property that belonged to me. In a few hours, I would go home to my modest apartment and try to make sense of documents that described assets worth more than $1 billion. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Thank you for celebrating with us last night. The hotel was absolutely perfect. We couldn't have asked for a better venue. Hope you enjoyed yourself despite being surrounded by all us Type A personalities. I typed back. It was beautiful. The hotel really is exceptional. That was certainly true. And in a few days, when I met with Mr. Chin and the board of directors, I would begin to understand exactly how exceptional it really was. The irony wasn't lost on me as I hailed a taxi. 4 years, I'd watched Marcus climb the ladder of success while family members dismissed my career as insignificant. Last night, his friends had whispered about budget table guests and family obligation invites while sitting in a ballroom that belonged to me. But perhaps the most remarkable part wasn't the wealth I'd inherited. It was my grandmother's wisdom in keeping it hidden until I was ready. She'd understood something about success that the rest of my family had missed. Real power doesn't need to announce itself. It can afford to wait quietly in the shadows until the right moment to emerge. As my taxi pulled away from the Grand Metropolitan, I caught a glimpse of Marcus and Victoria exiting through the main doors, their luggage being loaded into a limousine by hotel staff who had spent the weekend treating them like VIP guests in a property that belonged to their budget table relative. I smiled to myself and settled back into the seat. Next week, I would have some very interesting conversations with my family about my little hotel management thing. But for now, I was content to let them enjoy their honeymoon in Tuscany, blissfully unaware that their family's afterthought had just discovered she owned one of the most successful hospitality empires on the East Coast. The taxi driver glanced in the rearview mirror. Good wedding. Perfect, I replied, looking out at the city where I apparently owned several luxury properties. Absolutely perfect.
You foolish girl, Margaret, my mother-in-law sneered, waving the papers in my face. Did you really think Anthony would share anything with you? You signed everything away." I sat at my kitchen table calm, watching her ruin the edges of what she thought was my defeat. Her fancy clothes and perfect hair couldn't hide the smugness on her face. "You should read those papers again," I said quietly, sipping my tea. "I'm Olivia, 34 years old, and my marriage was falling apart in the most predictable way. My husband, Anthony, had fallen for his 23-year-old secretary. Typical. But what wasn't typical was how I had prepared for this. Margaret expected me to cry, to beg. Instead, I was calm, even smiling. "These are the papers you signed last month," she insisted, pointing at my signature, "giving up all claims to Anthony's money and property. His lawyer made sure of it." I nodded. "Oh yes, Anthony's lawyer, the one you recommended. Mr. Peters, wasn't it?" Margaret's smugness wavered. For the first time, she looked unsure. "What are you saying?" she snapped. "Mr. Peters is one of the best. He's handled our family's legal matters for years." "Oh, I know," I said, getting up to refill my cup. "Just like I know about the other papers I signed that day. 3 months ago, I noticed the signs, late nights, secret calls, sudden interest in his looks. But what really gave it away was Margaret. She visited more often, always suggesting I protect the family assets. "You should keep your inheritance separate," she'd say. "Let Anthony handle investments." She always had a story about some poor wife who lost everything in a divorce. I played along, pretending to be the naive small-town girl she thought I was. What she never realized was that I had been watching and learning for 8 years. Margaret's confidence cracked. "What other papers?" she asked, nervous now. I walked to my home office, with Margaret following behind. From my drawer, I pulled out a thick envelope. "You see, when I saw those documents, I had my own lawyer check them. And she found something interesting. Anthony had been hiding money." Margaret's face turned pale. "You had no right." "I had every right," I interrupted. "I'm his wife. And when my lawyer saw the hidden accounts, the property transfers to your name, she told me to sign your papers, and mine too." I spread out the documents, 8 years of financial records, bank statements, property transfers, and most importantly, emails between Margaret and Anthony, plotting to leave me with nothing. "Did Anthony tell you about his offshore account?" I asked. "Or did you help him set it up?" Margaret sank into the chair. "You're bluffing," she whispered. I smiled and held up a printout. "Passwords are usually something personal. Anthony always used your birthday. So sweet, right?" Her face drained of color as she saw her own words in black and white. Emails where she advised Anthony on hiding assets. "You really thought I'd sign away my rights without a backup plan?" I asked. "You taught me well how to protect family assets." Margaret reached for the papers, but I pulled them back. "These are copies. The originals, with my lawyer, along with recordings of all our talks about finances." A noise at the door made us turn. Anthony stood there flustered. Behind him, his secretary sat in the car, looking unsure. "Mom," he called, then froze when he saw the papers. "What's going on?" I smiled, gathering everything into the envelope. "Perfect timing. We were just talking about the documents you had me sign, and some other things you might want to hear." His confusion was almost funny. Like his mother, he thought he was smart. He never imagined the quiet girl he underestimated had been planning all along. I gestured toward the kitchen table. "Let's talk, all of us, about how this divorce is going to work." As I walked past a mirror, I caught my reflection. I looked exactly how Margaret always claimed I wasn't: strong, confident, and completely in control. This wasn't the ending I wanted for my marriage, but it was the one I prepared for. And as I laid out my terms, I knew one thing: Margaret would never call me unworthy again. The next morning, Anthony and Margaret sat across from me at our kitchen table, their faces a mix of anger and disbelief. My lawyer, Diana, spread out the documents between us, her professional demeanor a stark contrast to Margaret's barely contained rage. "This is blackmail," Margaret hissed, her perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled from running her hands through it repeatedly. "We'll fight this." Diana raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Henderson, I'd advise against using that term. Everything my client has gathered is perfectly legal documentation of financial fraud and attempted asset concealment. Would you like me to detail the potential criminal implications?" I watched Anthony shift uncomfortably in his seat. The confident businessman who planned to leave me with nothing now looked like a schoolboy caught cheating on a test. His young secretary was notably absent. Apparently, the prospect of a lengthy legal battle had dampened the romance. Let's review what we discovered, Diana continued, her voice crisp. Multiple unauthorized transfers from joint accounts, property titles altered without spousal consent, and documented evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. She paused, looking directly at Margaret, including several recorded conversations where you explicitly advised your son on how to hide marital assets. Those recordings were made without my knowledge, Margaret protested. They're inadmissible. I couldn't help but smile. Actually, they were made with your knowledge. Remember all those times you insisted we meet at the country club to discuss family matters? Single-party consent state, Margaret, and the club's security cameras caught every meeting. Anthony finally spoke up, his voice hoarse. Olivia, please, we can work something out. I made a mistake. A mistake. I interrupted, keeping my voice level. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, systematically planning to leave your wife destitute while hiding assets with your mother's help. That's a choice, Anthony. A series of choices, actually. Diana pulled out another document. Here's what my client is proposing. A fair division of assets, including the properties transferred to Mrs. Henderson's name in the past year. In exchange, we don't pursue criminal charges for fraud. Margaret's face turned an interesting shade of red. Criminal charges? You wouldn't dare. The IRS is very interested in undisclosed offshore accounts, I said quietly, especially ones used to hide marital assets. Would you like to explain to them why you're listed as a signatory? The color drained from both their faces. Anthony looked at his mother in shock. Mom, you're on my offshore account. Margaret's composure finally cracked. I was protecting you. That girl never deserved you or our family's money. I had to make sure. That's enough. Anthony's voice was sharp. You told me this would be simple. That Olivia would never figure it out. That she'd just accept whatever we gave her. I sat back, watching mother and son turn on each other. 8 years of dealing with Margaret's subtle manipulations and condescension had taught me patience. Now I was watching her carefully constructed plan implode, taking her relationship with her son down with it. You know what the funny thing is? I said, drawing their attention back to me. I would have been fair in a divorce. If you'd just been honest, if you treated me with basic respect, we could have ended this marriage cleanly. Diana nodded, sliding another document forward. My client's terms are more than reasonable, considering the circumstances. I suggest you review them carefully. Anthony picked up the papers, his hands trembling slightly. As he read, his face grew increasingly pale. The house, my investment portfolio, the vacation property, all marital assets, Diana confirmed, and all subject to equitable division. Unless you prefer, we present our evidence of fraud to the court. Margaret reached for the papers, but I placed my hand firmly on them. You don't get a say in this anymore, Margaret. This is between me and my husband. Ex-husband, she snapped. Not yet. I corrected her. And until the divorce is final, every asset transfer you helped him make is subject to scrutiny. Shall we discuss the condo you put in your name last spring? The fight seemed to drain out of her. For the first time since I'd met her, Margaret looked her age, the carefully maintained facade of superiority crumbling. Anthony stared at the papers for a long moment before looking up at me. You planned this all along, didn't you? You knew what we were doing. I shook my head. No, Anthony, I just learned from watching your mother. She always said to protect myself, keep records, be prepared. I took her advice. I just don't think this is what she had in mind. Diana began gathering her documents. We'll need your decision by tomorrow. After that, we proceed with filing our evidence with the court. As they stood to leave, Margaret paused, turning to face me. I never thought you were good enough for him, she said, her voice bitter. I smiled. No, Margaret. You never thought I was smart enough. That was your mistake. 1 year later, I stood in my new apartment overlooking the city, a glass of wine in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, and life had taken an unexpected but wonderful turn. Diana called me that morning with the final update. The last property transfer is complete, she said, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction. Everything's settled exactly as we agreed. How's Margaret handling it? I couldn't help but ask. Diana chuckled. Last I heard, She's living in that condo she tried to hide. The one she insisted was bought with her personal funds. Turns out the paper trail led straight back to marital assets. She's lucky we didn't pursue fraud charges. I took a sip of my wine, remembering the day Anthony finally signed the divorce agreement. His young secretary had long since disappeared, probably realizing that a man who would conspire with his mother to defraud his wife wasn't the best choice for a future partner. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Emma, my sister, carrying takeout and wearing a broad grin. "Ready to celebrate?" she asked, setting the food on my kitchen counter. 1 year since Operation Takedown the in-laws commence. I laughed, grabbing plates from the cabinet. "You're enjoying this way too much." "Are you kidding?" Emma spread out the containers. My brilliant sister outsmarted the woman who spent 8 years trying to make her feel small. "I'm going to enjoy this forever." She wasn't wrong. The past year had been transformative. After the divorce settlement, I used my portion of the assets to start my own interior design firm, something Margaret had always dismissed as my little hobby. Now, barely a year later, my business was thriving, with a growing list of high-end clients. "Did you hear about Anthony?" Emma asked, settling onto my couch with her plate. I shook my head. I try not to keep track. "Well, you'd love this. He tried to reconcile with that secretary, but apparently she's engaged to someone else now. And get this, he's living in a rented apartment because his credit took a hit after all those suspicious transfers came to light." I felt a twinge of something, not quite sympathy, but understanding. I never wanted to hurt him. I just wanted to be treated with respect. "And that's why you won," Emma said firmly. "You didn't act out of revenge. You protected yourself from people who were trying to destroy you." The sound of my phone interrupted us. It was a text from Anthony's sister, Kate. Unlike her mother and brother, Kate had reached out after the divorce, apologizing for not standing up to Margaret's behavior sooner. "Mom's selling her jewelry," the text read. "Says she needs the money since she can't access the family accounts anymore. Thought you'd want to know how karma works." I showed the text to Emma, who burst out laughing. The mighty Margaret selling her precious jewels. Oh, how the tables have turned. But I didn't feel like laughing. Instead, I felt a profound sense of peace. The woman who had tried to make me feel worthless for 8 years was finally facing the consequences of her actions. "You know what the best part is?" I said, turning to Emma. "I learned something valuable from Margaret after all. She always said a woman needs to protect herself, be independent, keep records. She just never thought I'd use those lessons against her." My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Deanna. "Just heard from Anthony's new lawyer," she wrote. "He's asking if you'll consider removing the financial disclosure requirement from the divorce agreement. Says it's making it hard for him to move forward." The requirement that Anthony disclose all financial transactions had been my idea, a safeguard against any future attempts to hide assets. It was completely legal and, given his past behavior, entirely reasonable. "Tell him the agreement stands," I typed back. "Some lessons need to be remembered." Emma raised her glass. "To my sister, who turned the tables on the people who underestimated her." I clinked my glass against hers, but my toast was different. To lessons learned, strength found, and peace earned. Later that night, after Emma left, I stood on my balcony, looking out at the city lights. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Margaret's number, but I felt no urge to call back. Whatever crisis she was facing, it wasn't my problem anymore. I thought about the scared, insecure woman I'd been when I first married Anthony, so eager to please his family that I let them diminish me. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and finally free from the need for their approval. The next morning, I went to my office, where my design firm was buzzing with activity. My latest client, a wealthy divorcee, had specifically sought me out after hearing my story through the grapevine. "I want someone who understands the importance of protecting yourself," she'd said during our first meeting. "Someone who knows how to build something beautiful from a difficult situation." As I looked around at my growing business, my supportive sister, my true friends, I realized that Margaret had been right about one thing. I wasn't good enough for her son. I was too good for their whole toxic family. The last time I saw Margaret was at a charity event 6 months after the divorce. She was wearing noticeably less jewelry, her designer outfit from last season. She tried to avoid me, but I caught her eye across the room and smiled, raising my glass in a small salute. She turned away quickly, but not before I saw it. The recognition that she had created her own worst enemy. Every criticism, every manipulation, every attempt to make me feel inferior had only taught me how to be stronger. I did send her a thank you note though. After all, she'd spent 8 years teaching me exactly how to protect myself from people like her. It seemed only right to acknowledge the lesson. Life has a funny way of teaching us what we need to know. Sometimes the people who try to tear us down only show us how high we can build ourselves up. Margaret had wanted to prove I wasn't good enough. Instead, she proved I was stronger than anyone, including myself, had ever imagined. And that was worth more than any property settlement could ever be. I have proof she's cheating, Amanda, my sister-in-law, said as she dramatically pulled out a manila envelope. Everyone gathered around the dining table, gasping as she spread out photos on the shiny wooden surface. I sat quietly at the end of the table, sipping my water and watching. My name is Sophie Bennett. I'm 32 years old, and I was watching my husband's family try to ruin my 8-year marriage. The irony was hard to miss. The photos showed me meeting different men over the past month, having lunch, coffee, and even dinner. In each picture, I looked like I was having deep conversations, smiling, leaning in, and sometimes touching their hands. To someone who didn't know better, it looked bad. Look at these, Amanda said with excitement. While David has been working hard, she's been running around town with other men. She turned to my husband, who sat still next to his mistress, Jessica. Now you don't have to feel guilty about Jessica, and you definitely don't have to give Sophie anything in the divorce. David didn't look at me. His mother, Eleanor, picked up a photo with shaky hands. Sophie, how could you? We welcome you into our family. A long time ago, her disappointment would have hurt me. Now, I just smiled inside. Well? Amanda pushed. What do you have to say for yourself? I calmly put my glass down and looked around the table. David still wouldn't meet my eyes. His parents looked upset, though I noticed his father, George, seemed more uncomfortable than angry. Amanda stood tall, one hand on her hip, pointing at the photos. Nice pictures, I said. The lighting is great. You must have paid your private investigator a lot. Amanda's smirk faded. She hadn't expected that. That's all you have to say, she snapped. You're not even going to deny it? I reached into my purse, everyone tense, waiting for tears or a confession. Instead, I pulled out my tablet and set it on the table. Why would I deny it? I asked, my voice calm. Those men are all divorce lawyers. Silence. What? Amanda stuttered. I pointed at the photos. That's James Morrison, the best family lawyer in the city. This is Michael Chen. His firm specializes in cases involving cheating. And this dinner? That's William Parker. He's great at handling cases where people try to hide money before a divorce. Amanda's face turned pale. David suddenly found his water glass very interesting. You see, I continued, when I found out about David and Jessica 3 months ago, I decided to prepare. You're lying, Amanda said, but she didn't sound sure. I turned on my tablet. That's the great thing about legal meetings. There's always proof. I pulled up emails and signed agreements. But that's not even the most interesting part, I said, looking at David. Eleanor's voice shook. What do you mean? Well, I said, during one meeting, I learned something about recent property transfers in this family. Lots of money and houses changing hands. New companies being formed. I let my words sink in. George shifted uncomfortably. David frowned. Dad, is that why you had me sign those papers last month? You said it was just routine family business. I watched as realization hit him. His family wasn't just helping him cheat. They were hiding money before the divorce. David, sweetheart, we were just protecting you, Eleanor started. I cut her off. Actually, you were committing fraud. I smiled. And my lawyers have proof. Amanda sank into a chair, defeated. You knew, she whispered. You knew this whole time. I nodded and grabbed my things. Next time you hire a private investigator, make sure they're not working for both sides. I stood up, fixing my dress. Oh, and those lawyers. I officially hired the best one yesterday. I walked to the door, then turned back. David, your lawyer will get the paperwork tomorrow. You might want to read it carefully, especially the part about fraud. And Amanda. I met her shocked eyes. Thanks for the photos. They'll make great evidence. My heels clicked on the floor as I left. In my car, I finally allowed myself a small smile. They thought they had trapped me. They had no idea what was coming. The next few days were full of chaos. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages from David's family. Some were threats, others were tearful pleas. Amanda, especially, kept switching between anger and panic. Her texts became more desperate. "You can't do this to us," her latest message read. "We're family." I thought about that word, family. They hadn't treated me like family when they were planning to leave me with nothing. I ignored her message and focused on my preparations. James Morrison's law office was exactly what I expected: shiny wood, leather chairs, and an air of power. I sat in the conference room, reviewing documents while waiting. Right on time, David walked in with his lawyer, followed by Eleanor and George. Amanda was last, trying to look confident but failing. "Mrs. Bennet," James greeted me with a nod. "Shall we begin?" I watched David's face as James laid out the evidence. He turned pale when we presented our timeline. Every shady property transfer, every new company, every attempt to hide money. Eleanor grabbed his arm when James mentioned possible criminal charges. "This is nonsense," David's lawyer said. "These were just normal family business decisions." "Are they?" I asked, sliding a stack of papers forward. "Because these documents show my name was removed from family business assets 3 months ago, right when David started his affair. Quite a coincidence, don't you think?" George shifted in his seat. He was always the weakest link, too worried about his social reputation to risk the scandal. "Now," James continued, "we're willing to be reasonable. Mrs. Bennet helped build this family's success. She only wants her fair share." "Fair share?" Amanda snapped. "She's trying to ruin us." I turned to her, calm as ever. "No, Amanda. I'm protecting what I helped create. Would you like me to play the recording of you and David discussing how to keep that gold digger from getting anything?" Her face went white. David's head snapped up. "You recorded us?" "No," I replied calmly. "Your mistress did. Jessica was quite helpful once I showed her proof that you were planning to leave her too, once you'd secured your assets." The room erupted into chaos. Eleanor was crying, George was demanding to speak to his personal lawyer, and Amanda was screaming about betrayal. Through it all, I sat quietly, watching my husband realize just how thoroughly he'd been outplayed. "Here's what's going to happen," James spoke over the noise, his voice commanding silence. "We have documented evidence of attempted fraud. We can pursue this criminally, or we can reach a reasonable settlement today. Your choice." David's lawyer requested a moment with his client. As they huddled in the corner, I could see the fight leaving David's body. He'd always been arrogant, convinced of his own cleverness, but now he looked deflated. "We'll agree to fair terms," his lawyer finally announced. "Excellent," James smiled. "Mrs. Bennet has already outlined her requirements." He distributed copies of the settlement proposal. I'd been thorough but not vindictive. I wanted what I'd helped build, nothing more. "This is outrageous," Eleanor exclaimed, but George placed a restraining hand on her arm. "Sign it, David," he said quietly. "We can't risk this getting out." As David picked up the pen, Amanda made one last desperate attempt. "Wait. Those photos. They were in public places. She was flaunting these meetings." I couldn't help but laugh softly. "Of course they were public. I wanted you to see them. Every lunch, every coffee meeting. I knew you were having me followed. I just made sure your investigator got exactly what I wanted you to see." The realization that they'd been played at their own game finally silenced them. One by one, the documents were signed. As James gathered the paperwork, I stood to leave. "Sophie," David called out, his voice strange. "When did you get so calculating?" I paused at the door. "I learned from the best, didn't I? Family taught me." The irony of my words wasn't lost on anyone in the room. As I walked out of the office, I felt lighter than I had in months. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just about winning. It's about showing them they underestimated you all along. Outside, the autumn air was crisp and clean. My phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. "It's done. Thank you for showing me the truth about him." I smiled, remembering how easy it had been to turn David's mistress into my ally once I showed her proof of his pattern of betrayal. She'd been more than happy to share the recordings of his promises to her. His plans to discard her just like me once he'd secured his wealth. Sometimes the strongest alliances come from unexpected places. As I drove home, I thought about family, not the one that had betrayed me, but the one I would build for myself now, on my own terms. 6 months after the settlement, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, sipping coffee and watching the city wake up. The morning sun cast long shadows across my recently furnished living room, highlighting the fresh start I'd made for myself. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Of all people. We'd maintained an unlikely friendship after everything. You won't believe who I just saw at Riverside Cafe, Amanda. She actually tried to pretend she didn't see me. I smiled, remembering how thoroughly the family had unraveled after our meeting. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect family business had cracked under the weight of their own schemes. George had retired early, claiming health issues, but everyone knew it was to avoid the whispers at his precious country club. Eleanor had thrown herself into charity work, desperately trying to maintain their social standing. Amanda, perhaps, had faced the harshest reality check. Her role in the attempted fraud had cost her position in the family company. Last I heard, she was working as a junior accountant at a small firm, a significant step down from her former executive title. My phone rang. It was James Morrison. Sophie, he greeted warmly, just wanted to let you know the last of the transfers are complete. Everything's officially settled. Thank you, James, for everything. You know, he said, his tone thoughtful, in all my years practicing law, I've never seen someone handle betrayal with such strategic precision. Have you ever considered a career change? I laughed, but his words stuck with me. In outmaneuvering David and his family, I discovered parts of myself I never knew existed: strength, cunning, and an ability to see 3 moves ahead. Later that afternoon, I met Laura, my closest friend, for lunch. She'd been my rock throughout everything, one of the few people who knew the whole story from the beginning. Have you heard? She asked, sliding into her seat. David's been demoted. Apparently, some of his business decisions during the whole divorce drama didn't sit well with the board. I shook my head. I'm not surprised. He always did think he was smarter than everyone else. Speaking of smart, Laura leaned forward. How's the new venture going? After the settlement, I used part of my settlement to start a consulting firm, helping other women navigate complex divorces and financial disputes. It felt right, using my experience to help others protect themselves. We're expanding, I said, unable to hide my pride. Opened a second office last week. Look at you, Laura grinned. From being blindsided by your husband's betrayal to running your own empire. Who would have thought? I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, trusting, naive, willing to believe in family loyalty above all else. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, but not bitter. If anything, I was grateful for the lessons learned. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Eleanor. I miss you. The family isn't the same without you. I archived it without responding. Some bridges, once burned, shouldn't be rebuilt. That evening, as I reviewed applications for my firm's mentorship program, I reflected on how life had changed. The family that had tried to destroy me had inadvertently set me free. Their attempts to leave me with nothing had pushed me to become something more than I'd ever imagined. The doorbell rang. It was Jessica with a bottle of wine. Our monthly catch-up sessions had become a tradition of sorts. To Karma, she raised her glass, settling onto my couch. David's dating someone new, by the way. Poor girl has no idea what she's getting into. Should we warn her? I asked, half joking. Jessica laughed. Something tells me she'll figure it out on her own. Besides, I hear she's quite clever with computers. Maybe she'll catch on faster than we did. We shared a knowing look. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about moving forward while watching karma do its work. As the sun set over the city, casting an orange glow through my windows, I felt at peace. The family that had tried to write me off as naive had taught me the most valuable lesson of all. Never underestimate someone who has nothing left to lose. My new life wasn't built on revenge or bitterness. It was built on wisdom, strength, and the knowledge that sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the best beginnings. I raised my glass to the setting sun, silently thanking them for teaching me exactly who I could become. The story of how my husband's family tried to destroy me had become the catalyst for my greatest transformation. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better.